Welcome to the Nature of Sovereignty. Today I have on Tonya Evans. She is a professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law School. She directed the first ever blockchain, cryptocurrency, and law online professional certificate program. She's the founder of At Advantage Evans and the host of the very successful Tech Intersect podcast. This is a podcast where she tackles the intersection between law, business, and technology. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me, and we're all nation building out here. And so I love connecting with like-minded spirits, all ready to get ready for this future of work, wealth, and creativity. So let's go.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because your background is in law, right? And I was wondering, when was the first time that you came in contact with cryptocurrency and what sparked your interest to dive into it further? And does your law background sort of frame your understanding of the cryptocurrency space?
Great question. I first became aware of Bitcoin in particular in 2017, but it was also around the same time that, of course, on the Ethereum network, there were so many initial coin offerings up for grabs there, particularly at the end of 2017 and kind of the boom and the bust cycle of ICOs. At the time, there was a friend of mine who was in an advanced grad studies program, and she was talking about what was being framed at that time as blockchain, not Bitcoin, which was an interesting conversation. With my mind now looking back at that, I kind of chuckle, but I understand intellectually, evidently, what was going on. People were still trying to figure out the space. There was this new kid on the block and all these damn tokens, and we don't exactly know what's going
ICOs,
on.
yeah.
The ICOs. So I tend to be, look, I'm licensed in 4 states. I love my law license. I have no intention of losing it. So at the time, not fully understanding and appreciating what digital cash was, because I don't have a science or technical background. My dad is a surgeon. My mom is a patent attorney. I was an athlete and a creative person, but I also have a pretty serious thinking cap. And certainly as a law professor, after practicing for 10 years and being an academic, I wanted to figure out, even if I couldn't fundamentally understand at the time what digital cash was, where it was, how do I get it back? What happens if I lose it? I wanted to understand the underlying principles of what it means to remove gatekeepers from the process of economic success. And I also wanted to understand what that meant for the next wave of lawyers who had to be conversant in the technology and to be able to show up. I was going to all of the blockchain conferences and certainly Bitcoin conferences and crypto writ large. And I was getting a ton of the legal questions. And so even if I didn't fully understand and appreciate personally what the possibilities of economic empowerment in the Bitcoin realm in particular, or understanding why Bitcoin is so special in comparison to the 17,000 other coins and tokens out there, I needed to understand the technology. I was getting a lot of intellectual property questions about what happens when someone is building on top of a layer 1 solution, because so much of that is open source software, and necessarily so. And we're getting to the point now, and we've been here for a minute, where people start building on top of that infrastructure and want to monetize and leverage and exploit for their own advantage particular aspects of it. What does that mean when you are building and appropriating open source code, but you want to lock it down? So I was getting a ton of those questions. And so my entree into the space was really just doubling down on my own expertise, because I really believe that you can't know all the things about all the things. But I have a decided level of expertise in intellectual property in general, copyright in particular, in understanding at the intersection of emerging technology, copyright, and other types of intellectual property. What does that mean for everyone? And then as a matter of social and economic justice, what does that mean for Black people as well? And so all of that, the next wave of lawyers, what this means for moving the needle for economic and social justice issues in our community. And then later I came to it personally because I felt like I had to have a little skin in the game. You can't fundamentally work in this space and not know how it moves. And the only way you really know how it moves is if you set up your own wallet, move it from point A to point B, know the difference between holding long or folks who might day trade or swing trade, and also a fundamental appreciation for value and for money. So even this exploration and my own rabbit hole experience really challenged my own assumptions of what managing my own money is, what self sovereignty is, and what the possibilities are for folks who are systemically marginalized from tech and finance. Because tech and finance come together, have a baby in this amazing decentralized world of value. What does that mean for the future? And so all of those reasons compelled me down the considerable rabbit hole. And I woke up about 4 years later, and here we are talking.
That is amazing. I went through a similar journey, and I started with the humanitarian aspect with it. What really got me was Alex Gladstein, and he talked about the CFA Frank. He had this long article about how in the former French colonies, the African countries who were former French colonies, they were still using the French dollar, basically the French currency, right? And there was a bunch of, obviously, monetary policy that surrounded that. They didn't have control of their own like treasuries. Like these are presidents of, like the Congo, Cameroon, and they don't have full control over their own treasuries. It's still controlled by the Parisian banks, right? And now there are people who are locally using Bitcoin, right? Because it's their own monetary system that's not dictated by some central authority that's 2,000, 3,000 miles away. I don't know. I haven't done the Google Maps.
Might as well be.
Right. Yeah. So they have that self-sovereignty. And there's so many examples. The ones in Nigeria where the president shut down the bank accounts of different like dissidents, and instead of using the Nigerian fiat currency, they was like, hey, if you want this social movement to continue, pay me in Bitcoin. And they had over like $200,000 in Bitcoin. And we can talk about current events now with and happening in Canada. So like this is true financial independence. And a lot of people, when they first hear about it, it comes from, oh, this is just a get rich quick scheme, or I'm just getting here. And you hear the stories like, oh, I only put $100 in and now I'm a millionaire. Like, no, it's not like that. That's not for the vast majority of people. That's not what it's going to be. But you can have control over your own finances and begin to build generational wealth. Now, with that, since I have a lawyer, I kind of want to get into your expertise.
That's going to cost you, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Just general information, not the hot stuff, you know what I'm saying? The surface level. So when you talk about intellectual property in a decentralized world, in the Web 3.0 world, what does that exactly look like?
It's a really challenging question for a number of reasons. One, the current version of there are a number of different things. One, even understanding the different types of intellectual property, I think will help, but also just to know that for copyright in particular, which tends to come up most of all of the big three, copyright, patent, and trademark, is just really fundamentally understanding the nature of exclusive ownership in the context of a community that is it's kind of like the antithesis of the space of someone staking out their own property exclusively, and contrary perhaps to a community where the space is open source and it's collaborative and we're all building and sharing, and particularly with layer one, and when you're building a new infrastructure to support other things, it necessarily has to be interoperable. That otherwise we replicate the same issues of this siloed area where one is building there and making a lot of money in another space, but they're not sharing information. So that makes it really difficult to function. So at those basic levels of the build, it necessarily is interoperable. That doesn't mean that the build is not happening in the larger context of a world that already has laws. And I know this is maybe an unpopular opinion sometimes. It's like, we're going to be outside and we're going to be outside of government and outside of business. And I totally get that. And I don't think it's an either or, but a both and. Understanding how the infrastructure is being built in the context of existing laws, and then asking the question, do we need new laws? Is there something that can be tweaked or amended, or does this iteration of technology necessitate a completely new structure? And the reason that I say that with copyright in particular is the current version of the Copyright Act in force, with some amendments over the years, is basically the 1976 Act. And let's talk about what copyright is as well, while we kind of dust ourselves off for the fact that we are involved and fully immersed in 21st century technology and innovation with a 20th century law. Let's just let that set in. Right. What is copyright? Copyright is the exclusive right for, supposed to be for a limited time. This is what it says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the Constitution, not to completely wonk out, but we should know this since we're talking about facts. Let's talk about
facts. Please do. Let's
nerd out. That I'm using air quotes for those listening, the founding fathers thought it's so important to own intellectual property that as it related to copyright and patent, they actually put it in the Constitution, not an amendment, not an afterthought, didn't just leave it to the Congress, put it in the Constitution. So the idea of, and power resided with not just white men, but white men with property. So that means property is pretty important. Real property, that means the land and the things built on land. Tangible personal property, our laptops and books and things that we have. And intangible property, intangible personal property, including intellectual property. So that's why it's so important for us to figure out what ownership means in a Web 3.0 world, to your original question. And that means the exclusive right to make reproductions, the exclusive right to distribute those copies, the exclusive right for limited times, we'll talk about that in a moment, to prepare what we call derivative works or adaptations, things that derive from the original. So if I write a book, but then I sell the rights for a screenplay, that screenplay is derived from the original right that is the book. So those are really powerful rights, particularly when we are always iterating with current things to make something new, like riffing off of music and all sorts of things. So, and also to display publicly and to perform publicly if it's capable of being performed. And what is it? Any literary or artistic work, music, writings, even software code, when it is what we call fixed in a tangible medium of expression, which basically means that it's capable of being copied. Is it written down? Is it stored as an electronic file? So those are actually the bundle of rights that is copyright. Sometimes people talk about copyright as if it's one right, but it's actually that bundle, and that creates a lot of opportunities to leverage and exploit. Particularly, we can talk about NFTs and what that means in that space.
And that's why I was going to ask about like NFTs, because I remember when it was first, not when it was first rolling out, but it got like that first media coverage. And I remember with Marvel and Spider-Man, they rolled out their NFTs, but they were doing it in reaction because there were people who were like repurposing different like comic books and making it a digital version and then selling it off as their own. And, you know, a lot of times, especially, you know, you're working on Ethereum or just a decentralized platform, is easier to work anonymously. So, you know, I'm not sure those people were, you know, were identified in any sort of way, but that's what forced Marvel and Spider-Man to come out and say, hey, no, this is the official Spider-Man comic book 10 or something like that, NFT, because people were already doing that. So I just feel like in this world, it's harder to pinpoint and find people who are repurposing this type of art.
Yeah, I would separate out the rights existing from your ability to enforce your rights. And this is not new to Web3. This is something that happened in the late 90s when we saw the advent of peer-to-peer technology that really upended entertainment industries and copyright-intensive industries, right? So remember back in the day with like Napster, Grokster, Kazaa, and all of those issues where you had, and the whole idea of decentralization with BitTorrent and all of those things. This is not exactly new, but this is the next level that presents some interesting challenges. So I don't mean to minimize it at all, but we've been talking about the implications of the ability to make a perfect digital copy in your home and send it to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 of your not so closest friends. Meant that the state of the technology improved so much that you could do what you couldn't do before. It was just really difficult to have wholesale copyright infringement back in the day before the advent of digital technology and the internet. And then fast forward to now having decentralized file storage on top of that, when you have the record of transactions and balances that is immutable, you can't change it, which can be great for a permanent record that you can follow, but it can have implications if you have an infringing work that's connected to an NFT that's stored on the Interplanetary File System, IPFS. What does it mean to really take it down? So the ability of an artist, for example, or Marvel or anyone that owns copyrights to say, hey, that's an infringing work platform, you need to take it down because of what we call the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Generally speaking, online service providers had to do that. But what does that look like in Web3? What does it mean to take it down and not have access to it when the whole purpose of decentralized file storage, for example, is the redundancy of that information to exist as long as there's a single record of it? So it presents really interesting questions, but these are things that we've been talking about since the 90s. And every time you have a different iteration of technology, it challenges laws because it takes a long time to put laws on the books, but a short time to innovate.
Right. And I think that's the reason why BBB, we focus our education on Bitcoin. That's the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And once you grasp, that foundation, that structure of the basics of how that works and why it exists and why it's 21 million and there's a fixed supply,
Right.
then we so I want to say encourage, but it says like then you can go out and discover more. But know that when you go out into those other territories is inherently more risk. When you're looking at DeFi, you look into the NFT space. So I know you kind of work in those circles, but how do you educate around this decentralized world to a person who doesn't know anything about it and give them that education, talk about like the pitfalls, where the risks are, where they aren't. And I was wondering how you sort of communicate that.
It's important for, regardless of the point at which people onboard into the space, there is no understanding of the space without Bitcoin. There actually is no understanding of the space to understand digital cash before Bitcoin and why Bitcoin was the game changer in 2009. If you don't have a fundamental appreciation for the problems that Satoshi, whoever he, she, or they are, the fundamental problems that decentralized money attempted to remedy, then you can throw your hat in the ring, but at some point you have to come back to the OG. And you have to understand the principles that distinguish it from other forms of value. And this is why I refer to crypto assets more broadly than cryptocurrencies. Some function well as currencies. Some would argue that Bitcoin, with the original idea of peer-to-peer cash, where are we now? I don't care where we are now. The fundamentals of it and the fact that we have, I guess, about 19 million of the 21 million out, that changes the nature and relationship of the holders of Bitcoin to value over time. Which is different than some of the functionality of other coins and tokens. I'm, and I think full transparency. I'm the Maker Foundation has since finalized all of the activities, but I was the chair of the Maker Foundation for the Maker DAO, of technically the Maker Ecosystem Growth Foundation, to be an outside director that was overseeing the efforts of full decentralization. I understand the role of stable coins. I understand the role of governance tokens. And I'm fascinated by decentralized autonomous organizations and what's going to happen in that way. And I think that it has its place. But out of context, I don't think you ever have the full picture. And it's not apples to apples. So my level of education is to get people to understand why Bitcoin came into existence, how it did, our relationship with money, how we have been indoctrinated to trust other people and not ourselves, and particularly in Black and Brown communities, how dangerous that can be. And then people get to make their informed decision. I have a special role as a lawyer and an educator to give people more information, to empower them with information, and keep my separate views of, I think everybody should start with Bitcoin. Okay, everybody may not start with Bitcoin. Let's figure out how to get you where you need to be. But you have to understand it in context and its role in history as the game changer and the customer service issue that traditional finance and traditional banking now has.
And as being on the chair of a Maker DAO, could you talk about a little bit of the needs that they're solving for and what projects are out right now, maybe what's on the forefront of innovation in that space? Because I'm
Mhm.
interested here. I don't know much. So,
Absolutely. So I'll talk at a high level about decentralization because I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding of the role that the foundation had in relationship to DAO, the DAO itself, and the DAO governance, which was fully governed by the MKR holders. That's the governance token, and DAI is the stablecoin associated with it. And it really was about unlocking your existing assets and almost the equivalent of pulling out equity in your home for other purposes, and the ability to not have to go to traditional banking and show your credit score, and God help you if you show your skin tone or your gender, and it puts you even further behind the eight ball. If I have an existing asset, either I have it or I don't. And the blockchain, the relevant blockchain will tell you that. It keeps an immutable record of my transactions and balances. Can I leverage my existing holdings in order to extract value from that for other purposes? And that's at a high level, the ability on your own terms to access value from your own holdings, and then to build a community and an ecosystem around that. And so that's why I was really excited about decentralized finance. I also think it's critically important for Black and Brown people to be participate on all different levels of what is happening now. And so to have someone like me, I don't want to be invited to another diversity or inclusion thing. My existence as the chair of a board speaks volumes. It changes rooms, it changes discussions, it changes how people view things. And so I felt like that was important work, particularly at that time. But the foundation itself wasn't the puppet master of that particular protocol. But it had a responsibility to ensure that when you roll something out, it's not going to be a rug pull. It's not going to inadvertently or intentionally hurt folks. And so that work of when you sometimes have a foundation that's involved with a protocol, you have probably a founder like Brune Christensen was the founder of MakerDAO some years ago, but lovingly releasing it into the world and let it do its own thing, which it has done for quite some time now, was the reason that you no longer have a foundation. Like, that's the point. And I compare that to centralized finance. I don't know too many boards that cycle off of any partnership or corporation or venture. And so I'm excited about, in the decentralized finance space, it's really removing the intermediaries in banking. If banking is about savings and loans, maybe you can do that with technology and your own, leveraging your own assets without the need in the same way for the existing structure. I do, final point, just believe that there are some bridges and some divides between centralized or traditional finance and decentralized finance. And I know that others might have a different opinion, but I think of sisters like Carmel Cadet that's built like a bridge between centralized finance and decentralized finance. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds in her estimation. And so I'm curious about how that will continue to evolve over time.
right. That's very interesting. And you being in this world of DeFi, NFTs, and Web 3.0, and also having the lawyer background, if you could have the ear of a policymaker, how would you advise them on cryptocurrency recommendations or regulations?
It's interesting because the United States in particular, it's so difficult to talk about this technology in isolation when you think of the context, the larger context of a global society and borderless technologies. But we do operate within particular geographical zones, and the complexities of the regulatory infrastructure in the United States is quite different from a Bermuda, for example. I'm on the advisory board to the Global FinTech Advisory Board to Premier Burt in Bermuda. And it's interesting to compare.
I met him. I met him at the last conference.
Brilliant, phenomenal, fantastic.
2021 in Miami.
Fantastic. He's come
It's
to
great.
speak to my class for a number of years. To have a head of state come and talk to your class is like some kind of wonderful. And
Yeah.
that also gets to representation of having a powerful Black man in front of a class, not because it's Diversity Wednesday, but because it just is. But comparing the complexities of our regulatory environment, we have the Securities and Exchange Commission, we have the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, we have Treasury, and all of these different pieces as a matter of the regulatory infrastructure, but also the legislative infrastructure. People don't fully appreciate, and I teach administrative law as well. People don't fully understand or appreciate that all of these agencies are actually creatures of Congress. You really want to move the needle on what agencies do and the policy setting and the promulgation of rules which have the legislative impact as if Congress had done it, then deal with Congress. And you want to move the needle on change with agencies because Congress enacts laws in order to create agencies and to set a policy agenda. And then they leave it to the agencies to figure out, based upon the reason that you were created, go forth and conquer based upon these rules. But they're usually quite open-ended. The agencies are focusing on what they are called upon to do by legislation, by what we call their organic act, the act that actually created them. And based upon that, they have certain rules and they have certain responsibilities. And I believe that SEC, CFTC, they're working within the parameters of what they are called upon to do. Every time you have some new financial or technological innovation, that basically you have to ask the question, are the existing rules and regulations sufficient for what this technology or what this financial product is doing? And do we have the jurisdiction to have a say about it? So it's interesting going back and forth between the alphabet soups, as it were, to even define the difference, for example, of a security versus a commodity, or how to categorize a crypto asset for purposes of taxation. These are really challenging questions. And so I would encourage all, and I have some sense of them actually doing this, but I'm sure that it could happen more often, is this idea of communication around what the technology is and focusing regulation on the harms as opposed to a blanket prohibition, for example, on technology. And
without understanding the protocol and how the system works.
Right. So if you don't have a fundamental appreciation for that, then the danger is always the over regulation that might hamper or slow down innovation. So we're looking at basically the protection of consumers and investors. And can you do that within the existing framework? And I think this is also not a popular opinion, but in many respects, up until we've seen more and more enforcement actions, for example, I feel like the regulators have stayed on the sidelines more than folks give them credit for. We see a lot of the enforcement actions. We certainly see the settlements. We see the big ticket items for that. I get that. But in comparison to what could have happened earlier, I think the period of time to kind of let things percolate, and also at the time, crypto, and still, if we're being frank, the market cap in this ecosystem is small in comparison to the others, but it is a fast-moving storm. And as I said earlier, it is a customer service problem, which is why all of those who were saying how horrible this was and they would never do it are now quietly trying to give, access to their high net worth clients so that they keep them in-house and on their platforms and all of that. So there's a lot of communication and education around the technology, and to really focus on the harms to ensure we're protecting people in the space, because there are risks of participating. I happen to believe Black and brown community in particular, there are risks of not, but we want to do it in a way that makes it safe, legal, so people can confidently move in the space. Otherwise, we're back to the same issue as Black and brown people of trying to amass wealth and then losing it. This is one of our best opportunities not to do that, but education is going to be important, the proper regulatory environment and calibrating that. Just as we're calibrating the technology, why would regulation be any different?
Absolutely. It is about preserving that wealth over time and not having a central actor or one entity who can dictate your finances and where it goes and how it's allocated. And shout out to Clev Mesidor.
Absolutely.
She's here in DC. I had her on and we had many conversations, and just having a cryptocurrency advocate on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely.
Right? And knowing how Washington works and knowing who to talk to and how to present it in a way to show that this is the best way to bring value to your constituency. Right. We're framing it in the way that this is not left or right. This is nonpartisan. Right. And we're keeping Bitcoin nonpartisan. We're keeping cryptocurrency in this new protocol nonpartisan.
Right.
And I think politicians are starting to get more privy to that and
Mm-hmm.
understand that the innovation happens when you have an open industry when it's like
Mm-hmm.
a less regulation, just to at least find out where it can go. And as you were saying, is really the regulation needs to be more on the side of reducing harm, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the importance rather than just a blanket constriction.
Mm-hmm.
This is a awesome conversation, Tonya. I know you're a very, very busy woman, and for people who want to get in contact, learn more about your projects, what's coming up, and also listen to the Intersect podcast, which I
Mm-hmm.
I was ripping through
Good.
many episodes, and it's very enjoyable, very informative.
Good.
Where should they go?
So, all things Professor Evans, you can go to proftonyaevans.com. That's Prof, like professor. Tonya, Tonya, Evans, Evans.com. And also my platform where I do help people onboard into the space at advantageevans.com. I have a monthly club, low cost monthly club. We get together twice a month. I have a fundamentals or foundational track and an accelerated track. So we onboard, we go straight from wallet setup all the way to leveraging and maximizing decentralized protocols, NFTs, and DAOs and the like. I also have more formal onboarding for VIP onboarding. Sometimes people don't want a full course. They don't even want to deal with the master classes or the membership. They just say, please help me. I can do that as well. I have evergreen courses that people can take where you sign up and immediately have access to all the information from setup to all the legal issues, and a book that's coming out as well, the NFT Law Guide for Creatives in the Future of Creativity. So that's something that I'm working
Awesome.
on. And so, and of course, as you've mentioned, the Tech Intersect podcast, it's a weekly show, drops Tuesdays at noon-ish Eastern time, and we cover all things at the future of work, wealth, and creativity. So that is all available at advantageevans.com. So advantageevans.com.
Great. And let us know when that book comes out so we
Definitely.
can get it out, because we have a lot of people on the BBB who release their books, Bitcoin Vegan, Isaiah
Yes.
Jackson,
Shout out.
Clev. So, hey, we're going to add you to the book club.
Excellent. I have a second one too, but I have to do
Oh,
one at a time. There are two.
okay.
One is Decode the Future, and the other that I put kind of ahead of the curve because there's so many legal issues in the NFT space. It's like, let me push Decode the Future to the side and work on the NFT Law Guide. So I will keep you posted. And also the Twitterverse. I basically live there other than in my own home. And so at IP Prof Evans, you can chop it up with me on Twitter.
Well, Tonya, thank you so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing. You are a role model, and you are breaking ground in this new industry, in this new space.
Um,
And I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This is the first time, but please, I'm here, so I'm happy to join you again in the future. And good luck with this series.